Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I'll never forget the Halloween I moved to Westport. It was a rough year for me. Just barely 12, moving in the hottest summer months to a new town in the middle of nowhere. Coming from the big city, the endless fields and forests were definitely new territory. Concrete was replaced with dirt and grass, skyscrapers, tall oaks. My mother assured me that I would adjust in time, that I'd feel more comfortable once I started school and made new friends. But as the crisp September air set on the small town, I began to feel lonelier than ever. It was hard being the new kid, and by the end of my first month of school, I had not one friend. Well, except for Annie. I'd met her one day in the park after school, swinging on the swing set just beneath the old maple trees. Her auburn hair glistened in the afternoon sun, radiant like the freshly fallen autumn leaves. I still remember her smile, her deep cinnamon brown eyes and freckled cheeks. I remember her humming, kicking her legs higher and higher, lifting her into the air. I was hesitant to take the swing beside her, at first, and quite honestly, was surprised when she acknowledged me when I did.
Hi,
She smiled.
my name's Annie. What's yours?
I glanced over to her.
Ollie. Hi, Ollie.
There was a little laugh in her voice.
I haven't seen you around the park before. This your first time here?
I nodded.
Yeah. My mom and I moved here last month. I'm still getting used to everything.
Annie stopped swinging, dragging her feet through the dirt beneath the swing to come to a full stop. She looked over at me, smile never fading.
Well, if there's anything you want to know, I got you.
She winked.
I've been here my whole life. I know lots of the places around for playing games and stuff. I can show you sometime.
I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. This was the first time anyone had voluntarily offered to do anything with me in this town, and I thought getting to know some of the best places to hang out would be a plus.
That would be great,
I said. We talked for a while longer, Annie asking questions about where I moved here from, what the city was like, all the basic new kid questions. I asked her a little about herself as well, where she lived, about her parents, what grade she was in.
I just live with my dad,
she said quietly.
And I don't go to school, not anymore anyway.
Really? I asked, surprised.
How come?
Annie was about to answer me when I heard my mother calling from the park bench. It was getting late in the evening, and I knew she wanted to be home to make dinner. I smiled one last time at Annie, extending my hand in friendship. She took it eagerly and smiled back. It was only then that I noticed the bruises just beneath her shirt sleeve. I thought nothing of it, what child would, and said goodbye. For the first night in what felt like forever, I was eager to tell my mother about my day and my new friend, Annie. For the next few weeks, Annie and I played together every day. I would find her on the swing at the park, humming and waiting for me. And then we would explore the small town, heading up and down the old streets and between shops. Annie had a story about everything.
My dad says it gets real busy through here this time of year. Something about peepers coming through,
she said.
Peepers?
I asked. She made her eyes wide, making faux binoculars with her hands around them.
Yeah, peepers. I guess people from the city that come up here to look at the leaves changing or something.
She looked at me.
I guess that makes you a peeper, Ollie. While we spent our time hanging around the storefronts and at the park, our favorite place to go ended up being just at the edge of town, to a wooded area, what must have been hundreds of acres. We never went too deep into the forest. Annie warned me that there were wild animals there, bears, coyotes, and rumored cougars. I wouldn't doubt it if the boogeyman lived out here too, she'd say. Probably out in a little shack by the creek. We'd sit out in the foliage, looking up at the gray skies hidden behind the bare branches of trees, just talking, laughing, living childhood the way we all should. Free. As it became closer to the end of October, however, I started noticing that the bruises on Annie's arms were thicker, darker. I didn't want to ask about them at first. Most kids had bruises. Even I had my fair share of falling off my bike or off swings, but there was something about Annie's that didn't seem right. What happened to your arm? I asked, once I had the courage to do so. I could tell I'd hit a nerve. Annie's bright smile quickly faded, and she tugged her sleeve down to cover the dark marks. Oh, it's nothing. I didn't question her further. Instead, we just lay together in silence, on our backs, atop a carpet of dead leaves. We watched the autumn gray turn above us, brushed by the skeletal branches. The first sign that winter would soon be on its way. After a long while, Annie finally spoke again. Sometimes I wish I could move away. I looked over at her. Move away? Yeah, she said, feigning a soft smile. Somewhere far away. Somewhere new, where no one knows me, where I can just start over. I was silent. She rolled over onto her side, facing me. You're lucky, Ollie. You're free. Looking back, I liked to believe that Annie got her wish. Her dream of moving away to some unknown place, new and fresh. We had been looking forward to Halloween all month, and were so excited to show each other our costumes. I went as a vampire, thinking it would be so cool to get to use the fake blood capsules in my mouth, and convinced my mother was finally old enough myself to give them a try. And Annie went as an angel. Her white dress reflected the dim streetlights, making her stand out brilliantly against the shadows. I'll never forget how she looked that night, shining, radiant. It still gets to me that Halloween night was the last time I ever saw her. I remember getting candy, laughing as we filled our pumpkin buckets. We rang doorbells, scrunching our noses at every raisin and popcorn ball tossed our way, and playfully arguing over which candy was the best. Well, I'll trade 3 of my 3 Musketeers for one of your Twix, I'd said. No way, Annie shot back. When we were done in our neighborhood, we wandered to the edge of the wooded area where we played daily. Annie was quiet, gazing out at the trees, the darkness. I approached her, speaking softly. Annie. She didn't look at me. She was still for a moment longer before responding, low and distant. I should get home. My dad won't want me out this late. I never truly got to say goodbye. Annie turned from the forest, from me, so quickly, and went back home. The next day, I didn't see her at the park where we usually would meet. I sat on the swing for hours, clutching my bucket of Halloween candy, waiting for the trades we had promised. Rumors began to spread through my school of kids who had known Annie, saying that she probably ran away. She'd spoken of it often, ever since her father pulled her out of school, but I didn't understand. I knew how much she longed to escape this town and the confines it left us in, but I never thought she would just up and leave in the night, without a word, a goodbye. At least, not to me. I never stopped thinking about Annie, not even after my teen years. In adulthood, there always had been a feeling of loss when the leaves began to change and the air grew cool and crisp. And every Halloween, I've always wondered about her, about where she went, why she hadn't said goodbye, and ultimately if she found her freedom, her happiness, and if she ever thought of me. This Halloween, I finally felt the excitement I had when I was a child. My son, Devin, was finally at the age where he could enjoy the day. In previous years, my wife and I always brought him around to a few of the local houses, but he was too young to really understand, or eat the candy. Now that he was 5, he definitely had more of the Halloween spirit in him. He chose his own costume this year, dinosaur onesie, and had been more than excited about going around to get candy. When the sun began to sink behind the hills, we headed out, flashlights in hand. Devin walked close beside me, his little pumpkin candy collector swaying at his side. We hit up the first few houses on our side of the street, making our way to the end of town, just beyond the storefronts. Devin was much more lively this year and into the whole trick-or-treating thing, and so going the extra distance wasn't as difficult as it had been in past years. A cranky toddler definitely didn't stand well for being that far from home late at night. As we made our way towards the end of the street, I could have sworn I heard a soft humming coming from behind me. I glanced back, expecting to find a trailing child on their way for the last rounds before the curfew set in. But all I was met with was darkness. The distant street lamps burning in the center of town. I was still for a moment, keeping a firm grip on Devin's hand, before I heard him begin to hum. That same tune I thought came from behind me. "Dev," I said softly. You heard that too?" My son looked up at me and nodded. Again, I thought I heard that same, cheery, but at the same time somber, humming. Only this time, it was coming from the trees, the wooded area just before us. I went to head back towards the center of town, back to the other houses on the opposite side of the street, leading home when my cell phone rang. It was my wife, late at work due to overtime. I answered, focusing on the conversation and what I could around me. "Hello," I said. "What? Another hour? They know you have a kid who you want to spend Halloween with, right? They couldn't just find someone else tonight?" Somewhere, too focused in our call, I lost track of time. Lost track of everything outside of the conversation. Devin managed to slip his hand from mine, making his way towards the forest. I heard him humming softly in the background of my call, but failed to realize that he had stepped away. Stepped to the edge of the wood. Only when I hung up did I realize him there, as if in a trance, staring off into the wall of trees. "Devin." I hurried over to him, taking his hand back. "Devin, what have I told you about wandering off? It's dark." Devin was quiet. He ignored my question, answering only with, "But the girl." I looked around, unsure of who he was talking about. I hadn't seen anyone near us, regardless of how little focus I had while on my call. "What girl?" I asked, Devon slowly raised his hand, pointing out into the darkness of the trees. Sure enough, there, deep between the branches and trunks, I could make out a figure in all white. And then, the humming. That humming I knew I had heard before. The tune my son began to mimic. I felt Devon yank his hand away from me once more, this time hurrying into the trees towards the figure. I called out to him, immediately following. The figure shifted, as if airy, floating away through the trees. But Devon followed. I kept calling out to him, my heart pounding, flashlight frantically trying to light my path. It was only when we reached the edge of a rocky slope that caught up to my son. I stopped beside him and scooped him into my arms. "Don't ever run off again," I said sternly, trying to catch my breath, both from exhaustion and fear. "Do you understand me? What if something happened to you? What if you fell or got lost or..." Devon wasn't paying any mind to me. He only continued to stare at the bottom of the slope. I slowly shone my flashlight down the leaf and rock-ridden decline, the shaft of light catching on broken twigs and dead grass. Just at the edge of where the light no longer could shine, it caught on something bright, white, radiant. I had to allow my eyes to adjust in the darkness and the frail light my flashlight offered. But what I saw was no trick of shadow or light. It was a dress, once pure white, now tattered and torn by the elements, stained with dirt and mud and time. But it wasn't the dress that brought the feeling of dread to the pit of my stomach, nor was it when my son, tightly gripping my shirt, in a sad tone, said, "Annie." It was what was in the dress, that once pure white angel dress. There was nothing left but old bones, skin rotten and decayed, graying, pulled tight. The eye sockets were hollowed out, every ounce of flesh shriveled and picked clean by the forest, picked clean by time itself. And the blood, the dried blood now browned and thick, that coated the neckline of the dress, staining down the chest. The only feature that hadn't been warped, tainted, was the auburn hair that still clung to the thin scalp attached to the skull. I felt sick, but yet I couldn't remove the ray of light from the corpse of the child buried partly by old, decaying leaves, and by the town itself. The next morning, the police took to the woods, excavating the body from deep within the trees. It was identified as Annie, the young girl I had befriended all those years ago, the one I last saw in that white angel dress late one Halloween. They say she was murdered and discarded out there, over the ravines, near the creek, where no one hardly ever traveled. No one except us, when we were kids. They suspected it was her father, the drunken old man who had pulled her from classes to homeschool her, when the worry of check-ins became too heavy, too risky, when the bruises on her arms began to show. She dreamed of running away, away from the town, away from her father, the only real boogeyman that ever existed. When they finally closed the case and laid her to rest, I stayed beside the grave, lost and looking for words. But the only one I was able to find in that cold autumn gray was the one I longed to have said all those years before.
Goodbye, Annie. Every Halloween I still wait at the edge of the wood, like I did the night I last saw her. I wait for just before curfew, when the streets become quiet, and the last of the children head home to count their candy and turn into sleep. Only then will I hum that song that was once familiar to my ears, the one from the park swing so long ago. And I wait and wait until the echo rises from beyond the trees, soft, sweet, often accompanied with the cool breeze, wrapping its way around my being. I'm lucky, Ollie. I'm free.
Brother Vance, tell us the latest prophecy. Surely you have seen more by now. The man before me was a wiry, tall creature with hair that seemed to be trying to run from the center of his head as though it might escape from some impending disaster. His eyes were a shade of blue that made ice seem warm, and there was a dullness to his appraisal that told me his thoughts were simple and dark. He dressed in black slacks and a black shirt that showed off his clerical collar, lest anyone forget that he was an ordained priest. He called himself Father Icarus, for he intended to lead us all into the light. Perhaps there had been a time when he was a good man, but that time was gone before I knew him, burned away by his continued attempts to climb into the sun. All that was left was obsession and a steadfast belief that he was in possession of the key to true salvation. He believed I was to be that key, but the truth was that there was no salvation to find. I saw the future. More precisely, the future was spoken to me, whispered in my ear at night while I tried to sleep. The voice of prophecy was like the tone of an old dial phone played across the bones of a washboard made of glass reeds. It rattled the teeth in my skull and stuck like hooks in my cavities, sending sparks of hot wire pain directly into my brain. I wanted to beg it not to speak to me, but it seemed to find pleasure in my pleas, and I had long since given up hope of relief. This was the voice of salvation that Father Icarus so believed in. This was the gift they all sought from me, though they hardly understood that it was no gift at all. At first I had stolen positive things from these nightly horrors. I could turn my back to the blackness of the world if only I could find the silver lining at its edge, and not everything whispered into my ear was poison. I prophesied storms and was always right. I told my peers where to plant their farms to avoid terrible floods. I predicted births down to the exact hour and prophesied the rise and fall of political figures. Father Icarus always loved to hear my predictions, and none more so than the one he considered the true sign of my power. I pulled from the ether the winning numbers of the largest lottery in our state's history, and the church reaped the benefits of my prediction. Surely then, my powers were good and just. Surely the source of such great fortune couldn't be evil. The things I kept to myself were the things that showed the true nature of the voice. I told no one about the rise of dark cults across the world. I shared no secrets about the babies born with black eyes and razor teeth that cut their own way from the womb. I wouldn't have known where to start talking about the doorways opening to strange places that let stranger things crawl into our universe. How could I begin to explain that other groups, just like ours, were popping up all over the world, and that their good intentions were turning into twisted nightmares? The flock didn't know that I had heard these things as well. They didn't know that the voice of prophecy had told me that the world was ending and that a time of suffering without end was coming. I had been quiet for days, unable to see light in the darkness of my nightly horrors. The worst of the prophecies were all that remained, repeated nightly like a madman's favorite album. Father Icarus was growing impatient. After all, my lack of prophecy made him look bad. It made his flock begin to doubt, or so he claimed. The truth was that the Father's flock had already accepted him as a newly born savior. I had no idea what he would have to do to chase them away, but it wouldn't be as easy as not giving them a new prophecy for a few days. "Surely the Lord has given you another premonition, son," he pressed me. He had been pushing me for days, and so in anger I gave him what he wanted. What gift does he have for us true believers? His nagging had grown to be too much. If it was prophecy he wanted, then it was prophecy I would give him. A great darkness is coming, and it is hungry and eternal, the end of all things to have begun. You will know it's coming by the messenger, a man who speaks for the unspeakable. He will herald the time of madness. The words were etched into my brain, and repeating them was easy. Father Icarus's expression faltered, darkened. I thought for a moment that he was going to yell, rant, or rave at me and demand I give him something less dark. But then he smiled. His expression was like the breaking of a storm, but the light that shone through the dark wasn't a pleasant one. There was no hope in this silver lining. "I'm not lying," I said cautiously. "I know you're not, my boy." He seemed honestly pleased, and this I found even more disturbing. "This is the kind of prophecy that we've been waiting for since you were first discovered. Can't you see our congregation has lived through the times of light? But what really draws people together is tragedy, hardship. These tribulations that you predict, they are a divine test. We will only grow stronger together, brother." I opened my mouth to protest, but the fervor in the man's eyes was enough to tell me that he wasn't going to listen. Not really. I slipped away as he began his preparations for the end times. I needed to leave this place behind. I'd yet to get a premonition that directly related to Father Icarus and his followers, but I could sense the change in atmosphere. Something bad was coming, and the longer I stayed where I was, the closer it became. The real problem was finding any place that was safe. Where would I go? "There are other worlds beyond this one. You only need a key." The voice crackled into my skull, and I stumbled mid-step, barely catching myself on a nearby railing. "What key?" I was talking to myself, but there was no one around to hear me. "Go forth, and I will lead you. This world is already dead, but you can travel to others. Find the key. Steal the van." "I can't just steal the van. People will notice. They'll come looking for me." The words, with their sudden direction, were making my heart beat fast in my chest. Normally, there were no directions. Normally, there was only descriptions of things that were happening or going to happen. This time, the voice seemed to be actually talking directly to me, and I didn't appreciate its notice. "Steal the van, Brother Vance. Escape the darkness." Minutes later, I was in the driver's seat of the compound's van. It was a new vehicle, one purchased with the lottery winnings, but it was still a large van, and so it wasn't exactly meant for fast, stealthy escapes. I had never driven it myself. In fact, I'd only driven a few times in my life, and it had been a much smaller car. I caught myself trying to look in every direction at once and forced my eyes to focus on the task before me. The morning was still dark. No one would be out to check on the van. I reached up and flipped down the visor. The key fell down in front of me and I picked it up. It was so easy. Surely if they cared that much about the van, they would have made more of an effort of keeping the keys in a safe place. It was pretty much a sign. Telling myself this allowed me to build enough nerve to put the keys in the ignition and turn the car on. The engine roared to life, filling the air with what seemed like far too much sound. I was committed at that point. There was no going back now that my escape vehicle was running. The door to the compound slammed open and someone stepped out into the early morning dark. "Who's in there?" a voice yelled. I shifted the van into reverse and slammed on the gas pedal. The vehicle responded with much more enthusiasm than I expected, and a moment later I was tearing my way down the dirt road that led away from the place that I had spent most of my youth. I was finally going to be free. The odds were good that they would come looking for me before long, but they'd be hesitant to use the police. Not all of the things that happened in Paradise City were entirely legal, though Father Icarus assured us that they were legal in the eyes of God, which I took to mean that they were legal in the eyes of Father Icarus, and that would have to be good enough. Still, it was several hours before I stopped checking the rearview mirror every few seconds for an indication that I was being followed. Freedom, however, was to be short-lived. It was only a few moments after I had stopped checking the mirrors that the voice spoke to me again. "Left, Vance." It was a simple direction, and I had no plan as to where I would go next, so the direction of the voice was as good as any. Still, listening to it made me feel like I'd given up one abusive overlord for another. Father Icarus was an evil man, and it could be hard to tell at first, but the voice that spoke the prophecies into my head wasn't evil. Evil wasn't a word that could be applied to the kind of darkness the voice represented. If chaos was a natural energy, then that is what the voice would represent. But even knowing that, I followed the directions it gave me. It was either that or be truly alone, and I feared being alone most of all. We drove far off of the main roads until we were on dirt paths climbing heavily wooded hills. At times, things became so bad I wasn't sure that the van would pull through, but it always managed. We traveled for more than 5 hours, but finally we came to the place the voice was leading us. I drove past a heavy steel gate that had been left open. The booth where a guard should have been stationed was empty, the glass broken and the door swinging wide. It was a clear sign that whoever had left this place behind had done so in a hurry. What was this place anyway? It looked like some kind of military installation. I parked my car on the inside of the abandoned gate and walked up to a door cut into the side of the hill. I had seen enough bunkers on television to know what one looked like, and this place was a bunker. The doors were 3 feet thick and sealed by massive turning wheels. Well, they weren't sealed now. The double door was hanging open, a cement tunnel crawling away from the entrance and deeper into the hill. A single line of fluorescent bulbs lit the path. "Where am I?" I asked, not entirely certain what kind of answer I expected to get. "This is a place where dangerous things have been kept, but no longer. The key that you need is inside. Follow my directions closely. Going the wrong way here means that you will die a horrible death." That was enough warning to keep me carefully on the path the voice wanted me to follow, even if the logical part of my thoughts were telling me that just getting away from here was the best thing I could do for my hopes at longevity. Going down into this bunker didn't feel like a good idea. Still, the voice had led me this far, and now I felt as though I was committed to the path it was leading me down. I followed the hallway, ignoring the branches and other directions, until I reached a set of stairs that took me down further into the facility. There were security doors, but they'd all been left open, some clearly intentionally braced open so they wouldn't shut. It looked like a case of sabotage. I turned a corner on the voice's recommendation and heard the sound of distant screams bouncing down the tunnel in my direction. This caused me to hesitate mid-step. Don't slow down if you want to live. Your time is limited. The chill this sent down my back got me moving again quickly. I walked past doors that looked like they had been pulled from the set of an insane asylum movie. Heavy metal structures with a slot at the top where someone could peer inside. Most of these doors were still shut, but a few of them were open. The voice urged me not to stop and look into the rooms beyond, and so I kept moving. "Stop," it finally said, and I turned to an open door on my right side. "It's in there. Go retrieve the key." I nodded and walked towards the door. It was already partially ajar, and a part of me wondered if there would be anything left in the room at all. Why was a key locked away in a facility like this anyway? I pushed the handle on the door and it swung open. Inside, the room was barren except for a pedestal in the very center. Atop the pedestal sat a small black sack. Or perhaps it was brown, and it was actually quite large. The more I looked at the bag, the less certain I was of anything about it. It seemed to shift as I turned my head, as though I wasn't seeing all of it at once and I couldn't make my eyes bring it into focus. "Is the key in the bag?" I asked. You will take the bag, put it in your pocket, and we will leave the same way we came, but faster." "So the key is in the bag?" I asked again, stepping forward towards the bag, even though doing so made my stomach flop as though I was getting motion sick. "You are not to open the bag. Just put it into your pocket and leave. Time is running out, Brother Vance." As if to emphasize the voice's words, an unearthly roar echoed down the corridor, cascading off the walls as though searching for the next victim of whatever horror had summoned the sound. I sprang forward on legs that suddenly wanted to shake and grab the bag, shoving it down into my pocket even as a feeling of utter revulsion swept through me, though the revulsion was quickly followed by a strong curiosity. It was an insidious thing, this curiosity, nettling at the back of my mind in an insistent way. It kept asking me if I really wanted to carry a bag whose contents I didn't know. Wouldn't it be better just to give it a single look to make sure it was safe? A quick peek into the bag couldn't hurt. Fortunately for the time being, I had a far more pressing task to pursue, and that was my escape from this awful place. I ran back through the halls as fast as my legs would take me, and I would have sworn that something terrible was in pursuit. I could feel it at my back, its presence so pressing that I refused to even glance over my shoulder. I knew that if I chanced a single look back, I would be snagged by my pursuer and dragged back into the dark of the tunnels to become just another screaming voice. Somehow I made it back to the van. As I was finally forced to look back the way I had just come, all I saw was an empty doorway. Whatever phantom had chased me through the halls had gone back into the depths, or perhaps had escaped into the world. Either way, I was free to continue my own exodus. I threw the van into reverse and escaped from that place as fast as the little people mover would take me. It didn't feel fast enough. The pall of that nightmare place seemed to stretch far beyond its walls. In fact, even as I rejoined the highway, I could still feel its cold touch upon my skin. This was my second escape of the day, and some part of me knew it was the more dangerous of the two by far. The strange pull of the object in my pocket was just another aspect of that. It clung to my curiosity like a hook caught the gut of an overeager fish. "The end of this place is upon us." The voice of havoc rang through my head. "Then how do we escape it?" I asked, more afraid than I'd ever been before. I didn't want to live in a world that felt as alien as this one now did. "I have the key. How do I get out now?" "The door." The words slipped into my consciousness, bringing them images of an old wood door set in the frame of buildings in what looked like a city alley. If there was something special about the door, I couldn't decipher the fact with just the short vision granted to me, but I knew I wouldn't have to either. The voice was still guiding me, and now I knew where we were going. We traveled on through the night and into the next day. I hadn't slept, and every minute of driving was an agony, a personal fight to stay awake and aware. Before I even knew it, we were pulling off of the interstate and winding our way into the depths of the city. The buildings rose like spires around us, and the angry scream of the traffic kept me alert for this last leg of my journey. Even in this place that was so alien to me, I could sense the change in the world. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, and tempers flared at even the smallest offenses. A man crossing the street against the light was accosted by an angry driver who dragged him to the ground and began beating him savagely as a crowd gathered and cheered him on. I passed a small store where the clerk had drawn a weapon on a kid he had caught stealing a can of soda. Thankfully, I was well past the scene when I heard the telltale bark of weapon fire. A couple caught in a small argument tumbled across the ground, fists flying and hateful words drowning out the laughter of those who had come to watch it all unfold. People were exploding with hate and rage. I moved through them like a man wading into a swift river. I could feel the torrent of madness washing around me, but I kept moving forward. Escape was nearly at hand. I followed the guidance of the voice down a narrow alley and then another that bisected the first, the channels between the buildings becoming so narrow that I felt like I could scarcely walk without turning to one side or the other. Suspicion was beginning to creep into my mind. Perhaps the voice was leading me into some kind of trap. Was I a fool for following it deeper and deeper into dark places? The object in my pocket seemed to throb with intensity. Maybe, just maybe, looking at it would help clarify the situation for me. Just as those thoughts crescendoed into a body-shaking horror that I was certain would undo me, the door appeared before me, exactly as I had seen it in my vision. It looked old. The building into which it was laid seemed brand new by comparison, and the old brick structure had to be a few hundred years old. Why then did the door look like it had been here far longer than the rest of the structure? It looked like it would more appropriately be set into the wall of a castle, or perhaps found amidst ruins buried in the woods for thousands of years. The wood gave the impression that a solid kick might turn the whole thing into a pile of splinters, but when I reached out and touched the portal, it felt as firm beneath my fingers as the bricks into which it was set. I grabbed the handle and turned it, but it didn't yield so easily to my grasp. There was no keyhole anywhere on the door that I could see, and the panic started to slip back in. How do I open it? Where does the key go? I tried the handle again, taking it with both hands and trying to force it. Calm, Brother Vance. Place both hands on the door and wait. I did as the voice said, though my hands were shaking as I sat them against the worn wood of the door. I laid my palms flat and waited. The door was cold, as though it had no regard for the relatively warm weather that existed around it. It was cold enough that after a few moments of resting my palms upon it, they started to hurt. I was about to repeat my discomfort so the voice knew what was happening, but as I opened my mouth, I felt a click within the door, as if some unknowable lock had just set its pins. Now, open it now, quickly. I scrambled for the handle, twisting it sharply and pushing at the door. It had to push open because there was no way it could be pulled open in the narrow passage. The door fell wide, and I toppled through it, my stomach swinging freely as I lost balance and cascaded through the opening. I was overcome by a sensation of movement for a moment, as though I'd fallen for much, much further than I could have, and then I was laying on the ground righting myself. I heard the slam of the door behind me, and I turned quickly to see that, indeed, the door had shut itself in my wake. What I didn't understand was how the door was sitting at an angle above me, apparently lodged in the side of an old tree. The frame was exactly how it had been on the other side, but the position was impossible. I could not have stepped through a door in an alley and walked out of a tree and, well, I wasn't certain where the tree was, but a quick look around me told me I was nowhere near a city. Forest spread out around me as far as I could see in any direction. I couldn't even hear a car or an airplane. Wind rippled through the branches of the trees, and I shivered. It was cold in this new place. The trees had cast off their leaves, and the taste of snow was in the air. I was ill-dressed for such weather in my light slacks and short-sleeved t-shirt. "Where am I?" I asked, not yet feeling the relief I had hoped to feel upon passing through the door. This place felt strange, if not as tainted as the one I had left. "So ungrateful, Brother Vance." A voice rose up to my left, and I almost fell over my feet, turning to see who it was. Some terrified part of my mind told me it was going to be Father Icarus, that he had followed me all the way to this new place, and he was going to be furious. But it wasn't the mad father who faced me. It was something far worse. The voice had spoken of this one. He had eyes as black as the space between stars and colder than the ocean in winter. His smile stretched too far in his face, as though his mouth could open his head in half and he might devour a man whole, though he was no bigger than one himself. Still, large though he might not have been, his presence was vast. He was a beacon of maliciousness that flared like black fire where he stood. "We brought you all the way to this new safe place, and all you do is complain that you're cold and the world is strange. That is behavior most unbecoming of a man of your accomplishments." The uncanny man spoke with a voice plump with false sincerity, and one that addressed thoughts I hadn't even given words to. My body shivered, not from the cold, but from facing this nightmare in the flesh. "What accomplishments?" I managed to ask, for I had done nothing but run away. Why, you've done the most important thing a man can do in service to the worm, Brother Vance. You moved the beacon to a new world. It smiled then, thousands of teeth filling the wretched gap in its face. You've brought the worm to a new place to feast. As a reward, we will let you watch as this new world is consumed. I shook my head. No, I was just trying to get away. The dark creature laughed. Our heroes are often born of cowardice. It is fear that lets us inside, that empties out a place for us to take root. And Brother Vance, I promise you that we are rooted in the very fabric of who you are. We chose you to carry our prophecy, and then we chose you to carry the beacon. You were our champion from the very first time you woke up sobbing from one of our visitations, and we have feasted on your misery ever since. We drove you right into the hands of Father Icarus, and now his compound is burning with all of the precious flock tucked away inside. You helped to do that, Vance. You should be proud. Their screams burn brighter than the carbon in their bones. Laughter seemed to echo all around us, rising as if from some damned audience, and it was joined by the sounds of people screaming in heart-wrenching agony. I fell to my knees, shaking in horror. The uncanny man shook his head. Tisk, tisk, Brother Vance. There is no time for sloth. Our master hungers.
It was late August, time of the summer burn. The sawyers and lumbermen jumped like guilty cats when the rattle of heat lightning scrawled brittle designs upon the distant hills. You could slice the stink of the pulp mill with a log peeling knife. It was the kind of hot, stale weather that made Timmy almost want to lie down like a lizard on a rock, feeling the sweat cocoon and crawl across his skin, thinking of sweat-lodged Indians and the last stand foreign legionnaires. Timmy lay in the shade beneath Granny Jill's lilac grotto, getting drunk on that sweet purple stink that never quite left the bush. The scent lingered in the bark like mildew in a basement. He liked to get down close to the roots. He smelled the memory and promise of spring like it was yesterday, forgetting about how very few short weeks were left before the clamor of a ringing school bell hollered him from out of the shelter of his dreams. Timmy's granddad had planted the lilac grotto the year Granny Jill first wore Granddad's ring. Just a few bushes he had traded a day's work in the field for, but they spread like a beautiful cancer. Until now, nearly 50 years since they had first been planted, the lilac grotto was dense enough for a 13-year-old boy to crawl into and hide. There was a heart carved on the central trunk. No initials, just a heart. It could have been carved by anyone, but Timmy imagined it had been set there by his granddad. Timmy liked to sit in the shade of the lilac grotto, the branches twisting around him like friendly old arms, only scary at night when the wind whispered secrets to the moon and the leaves dreamed of flames licking high.
All wood dreams of the sun,
Granny Jill once told him.
It is why sparks dance in the chimney, why smoke rises to the moon. Dreams born in the heavens 1,000 million miles from here have etched their memory into the bark of every branch. When you throw it into the fire, you're just setting it free to rise to heaven and beyond. Remember that, long as you draw breath and stare at fire.
Memories like that lived a long time, like the gray tobacco aroma that tarred Granny Jill's breath and skin. Granny Jill's fingernails shaded from yellow to brown like old elm leaves. Her breath heaved heavy and slowly like a porch swing easing back and forth. Memories like that made the wind that whispered behind Granny Jill's tidy movements prickle Timmy's nostrils in a funny smile kind of way. It was here, sitting in the shade of Granny Jill's lilac grotto, that Timmy first saw the Tumblebug Man. Tumblebugs are those little crawly beetle wrigglers that you find under rocks and logs and old tar paper. They like the darkness and are happy to crawl through the muckiest slime, and if you try and catch them, they'll tumble themselves up tight into a ball, figuring to blend with the slow white rocks. They were bugs, and easy to kill. They were fun to stake out with toothpicks. They didn't burn as neat as ants, and when you squashed them, you always felt like you had to wipe your sneaker. And they always came back. No matter how many you killed, the tumblebugs always came back. They didn't bite or anything, but Timmy didn't like to see them too close to the house. It kinda gave him the feeling they were tasting the house and what lived within it whenever they crawled in the shadows of Granny Jill's whitewashed foundation. "Do you got any bread?" A voice spoke, wet and burning like a drink of ash soap. The voice seemed so close Timmy almost jumped from the grotto. He looked out from the concealment of the shadows to see a dank and heavy man standing at Granny Jill's doorway. The man looked like a pile of rags soaked in a swamp. He stood there, sort of leaning, like he was sucking something good and juicy out of the doorframe. Timmy didn't know it then and there, but he was staring at the Tumblebug Man.
"You wait right here,"
Granny Jill said. Granny Jill went and she got the Tumblebug Man the bread without even bothering to lock the door. It was something she always liked to do. She liked to feed the wandering men. Granddad always warned her about it back when he was alive, but the cancer crawled into Granddad's lungs 3 short years ago. He lay down in a hospital bed that stank of pine oil and sawdust, and before the summer had passed, he had soaked into the bed sheets and vanished like rain spilled into a scrawl of moss. Timmy missed his granddad. He missed his mom and dad, dead in a car fire long before he could remember. Granny Jill was all he had left. Timmy sat and watched. Granny Jill knew he liked to hide in the grotto, but she never knew when. Besides, Timmy was so good at fading into the shadows and staying indie and quiet that she often forgot to look. Even if she had known, she wouldn't have worried. Granny Jill was good that way. She never gawked at Timmy the way some adults did, all slow and wary, like you were some kind of germ on legs. She never looked at him like he was something that ought to be sterilized and burned. No, sir. Granny Jill treated Timmy like he was real and grown up, all in one breath. There just weren't many others who ever did the same for him. The Tumblebug Man looked Timmy's way, squinting like he could smell something hiding in the bushes. Timmy knew he was too far away to be seen, but Timmy slid back an inch or two into the shadows just to feel safe.
"There's some bread, $1 for the road, and my blessing for luck,"
Granny Jill said. The Tumble Man stared at the bread. Then he muttered something too low to be heard, and then he spat on Granny Jill's pine-oiled porch. Timmy heard the spit hit, hard like a bullet, and just for a moment he thought he heard it sizzle. Right then was when Granny Jill should have slammed the door, but she just smiled. Timmy could see the sun making shine holes out of her glasses, and for a moment she looked like a stranger, like someone seen far away, stepping onto the road in the path of oncoming truck. You saw her danger, but you were too far away to help. That was the thing about being young. Timmy always had the feeling when the mailman brought those long, wide envelopes that Granny Jill always said were bills, even though Timmy never remembered meeting anyone named Bill. Times when Timmy knew Granny Jill was struggling, trying to lift up something too big and too heavy for any one body to lift. Times like that he'd lean out to her, wanting to help, but not knowing how. Times like that he felt too goddamn young. An hour later, the tumblebug man stepped from Granny Jill's front porch. He walked down the long stone path, grinding his heels and swiping them across the green-painted stone walkway like he was trying to dirty the rocks. He paused by the lilac grotto. Timmy hunkered back, praying he couldn't be seen. The tumblebug man reached into his pocket and dragged out a handful of fresh-baked bread. Timmy could smell it, fresh and full of yeast. Granny Jill baked it every morning, sold some to the market, but always kept a loaf for home use. The bread grew green-gray moldy in the tumblebug man's hand, like it was sitting under a wet rock. Mold and white fuzz sprouts like dandelion seed, and the tumblebug man pushed his face into the handful of moldy bread and sucked it up with a wet suckling sound. It was the kind of sound a straw makes at the bottom of a milkshake glass. Then the tumblebug man wiped his hands across his lips like he was tasting them. Then he unbuckled his trousers and pulled his dangle snake out. He pissed a long, hot puddle into the roots of the grotto, not even looking where he was relieving himself, just leaning back and staring at the sun like he was thinking about throwing a rock at it. His dangle snake was long and dirty, kind of twisted like a root. He moved and twisted like he was writing something in the dirt. The piss steamed as it hit the ground, spattering out a running cascade of dozens of hundreds of tumblebugs, low and scuttering little things that ran towards Timmy. "And do you like that?" the tumblebug man asked. Timmy pushed back against the central trunk in the lilac grotto, feeling it quiver like there was something out there that could even scare a tree. Timmy got ready to run. He was certain the tumblebug man would reach in under the grotto and drag him out, maybe suck him out like a skinny kicking strand of spaghetti. "Not yet," the tumblebug man said. "Maybe later." Then he dragged a large pocket knife from his hip pocket, snapped it open. It was the rustiest, dirtiest knife Timmy ever saw. If someone ever was cut with such a knife, they'd surely die from leprosy, lockjaw, and 100 forms of plague. They'd die slow and screaming, their limbs falling off one by one, making a stink that all the sulfur in Egypt couldn't burn off. Then the tumblebug man used the pocket knife to carve something into the wood. Timmy had seen this sort of thing before. Devil scripture, Granny Jill called it. Hobo marks, signs that might mean this lady is nice, or keep moving, or we'll trade work for food. Timmy could hear the knife working slow into the wood, like listening to a rat chewing in the walls, all low and steady. When he was done, the tumblebug man stared one last time into the lilac grotto. Timmy could see his eyes, all watered and yellow like bad lemonade, like Granddad's bed sheets before the cancer finished with him. And then he sort of walked away. Only halfway down the street, Timmy finally blinked, and when he finished his blink, the tumblebug man had vanished. The mark on the gate post was twisted and deep. It looked like the writing made from meat hooks and cleavers, all looped and jagged-edged. Just looking at that knife mark made Timmy feel like he wanted to turn and run, and lean and grab it at the same time. He touched the knife mark, and it seemed to bite him with 1,000 tiny wood-slivered teeth. It was like sticking his hand on a rattlesnake that had swallowed a beehive, all hot and tingly and hungry all at once. Timmy had been bit by a stickleback perch once, and the knife mark felt worse than that. It felt like the wood was biting him into itself, sucking him clear out of his sneakers. Whatever the sign said, it was real bad riding. Timmy grabbed the rock and hacked at the gatepost, trying to smash the riding flat. Only it dodged his swing. He wasn't sure how it did it. It was just like it was there, and then it wasn't. He hit at it again, only this time he smashed his fingers. He danced and swung, cursing loudly, shaking the fingers so the air would cool the pain. The blood from his hand painted the wood like a thirsty shingle, and then soaked slowly and thirstily into the knife-scarred wood. Timmy stared at the wood. The last of his blood vanished while he was watching. The mark puckered and smacked like it was licking its lips.
"What are you doing to that gatepost?"
Granny Jill yelled. Timmy dropped the rock.
"I'm just smashing a bug,"
he said, and ran guiltily inside. Granny Jill didn't yell at Timmy for banging the rock on the gatepost. She never was much for yelling, yet she never let him get away with mischief without hearing some kind of scold. But not today. Today she looked tired, like she hadn't slept. There were shadows hung like nooses beneath her eyes, like she'd been up all night worrying. She looked at his finger, making that sound in the back of her mouth.
"That's going to leave a mark."
Then Timmy had to ask,
"What that man do to you, Granny Jill?"
Granny Jill stared at Timmy like he was speaking in tongues.
"What man, Timmy?"
And that was all she'd say. That night, Timmy tossed and turned. He saw a tumblebug scuttling under his bed. Only he didn't dare set foot from under his covers for fear of the looming shadows. Granny Jill must have tossed all night. It sounded so loud from her room it was like she was moving furniture. Once he even heard her moan, long and low and shuddering, like somebody mean was drawing a hunting knife in and out of her soul. The next morning there was cold oatmeal for breakfast. There were lumps in the oatmeal, like a pot of bad wallpaper paste, and it tasted funny. Timmy tried to peanut butter himself a slice of bread, but Granny Jill said,
"No, that bread is for somebody else."
Timmy knew she was going to give the bread to the tumblebug man. He ran to the cellar and he got a bucket of paint. He cracked it open and stirred it like his granddad taught him.
"That fence needs painting,"
he told Granny Jill.
"It's time I got to it."
Timmy had heard his granddad use that same phrase time and again when the roof needed patching or the grass needed cutting or the branches of the big swamp oak wanted pruning. He'd used these words now like a magic charm, and it seemed to work. Granny Jill paid him no mind as he walked through the kitchen with a brush and a bucket of green paint. But the gatepost drank the paint just as quick as it had drunk up Timmy's blood, the bristles coming off the brush like it was 100 years old and drank them too. "Thirsty old riding, isn't it?" came a voice from behind Timmy's left ear. It was the tumblebug man, standing there and shadowing over Timmy like a mountain that had learned to walk. "It ought to be thirsty. It's been waiting a long time. Riding like that was old when God was still figuring how to count to 7. He leaned closer. "Do you know what I'm going to do to your granny, boy?" He started to whisper, low and wet and hot, pouring the words into Timmy's ear. And all Timmy could do was stand there and listen. having no more say in the matter than a pinned caterpillar, staring at the writing on the gatepost, watching it move and twist like a bundle of snakes. Tumblebugs crawl across the writing, dancing like a tangle of scuttling waltzers. Then the Tumblebug man went to the house and walked straight in without bothering to knock. Timmy waited in the shadows of the lilac grotto. When he felt strong enough, he walked to the porch. He stood there a long time, like the house wasn't his anymore. He felt the heat of the sun upon the plank porch, felt the soles of his shoes sticking to the ancient paint. Then he reached out for the doorknob. The brass and glass felt hot to his touch. It felt like it would brand him if he wasn't quick and careful. He pushed the door open. It swung like a forgotten wish. Then he walked into the front hall. He walked down the hall and past the parlor and up the stairs. He knew where they'd be. He knew they'd be in Granny Jill's bedroom. He stared at the bedroom door, not daring to touch it. The marks were there too, moving like reflected light, dancing like fireflies over the wood. Timmy heard the moans coming from behind the door, the kind of moans he had heard not a few years before his granddad passed away. Only these moans sounded dirtier, like they had been tainted with something older and fouler than sin itself. The door swung open. The Tumblebug man stood there, nakeder than Adam. Those marks, that writing was scrawled in something darker than ink all across his body. Letters squashed so close they looked like scales on a snake. Only the marks on his body were moving. They were scuttling and crawling all across his body. I get done with her. I'll come for you, the Tumblebug man said. Timmy ran, leaving Granny Jill there, alone with the Tumblebug man. But not before he caught a look of Granny Jill lying in the bed naked. Stringlets and gobs of gray, moldy slime dangling down from her mouth and hair. It looked like she was dead and fished out of a swamp. Only Timmy could see she was still breathing. Timmy waited until the moon hung its hat on the highest skyhook it could find, and then he slunk back into the house. He felt bad for leaving Granny Jill like he did, but there wasn't anything he could have done. He tiptoed up the staircase, eyes glued on the bedroom door like moths to a fire. Before he did anything, he had to make certain sure Granny Jill was okay. She wasn't anywhere near okay. Lay there making a wet whistling breathing sound, naked and gray and greasy cold like a chunk of dropped bacon. The mold and slime had grown across her, forming the marks that the Tumblebug man had carved into the gatepost. Hooks and scrawls warped across her ribs, looked like they'd been rooted and gored into her flesh, and through it all the tumblebugs crawled, scuttering dirtily about in her navel and her mouth and her ears, and some spots Timmy didn't want to look too close at.
Granny Jill?
Timmy called. She opened her mouth like she might speak, but all that came out was the kind of moan a dying shadow might make. The kind of moan made you think of thirsty dirt and worms twisting on a hook. Dark sounds hid behind that moan. Timmy felt she was saying whatever words or signs the Tumblebug man had carved on her soul. Timmy went to the closet and he laid Granddad's old hunting jacket over Granny Jill. Went to her jewelry box and found Granddad's old pocket watch. He wound it and set it by her bed, and alongside the watch he placed a stand-up photo he had got from school last year. He had done all he could for her. Next he went downstairs to the basement workshop. He knew just what he was looking for. Grandpa's bucksaw. He picked it up, felt the heft of it, like a Cree Indian hefting a hunting bow. There was a soft, tattery blue glow in the corner of the workroom. Timmy saw his granddad standing there in the shadows for half an instant, coaxing him onwards, like he knew what the boy was up to. It was time to deal with the tumblebug man. Timmy knew just where to find him. Only place low enough for a man like that to linger. Only place where he might find welcome. The hobo jungle, Granddad used to call it. The place where the traveling men would live. The men from the trains, and the drifters, and the gamblers, and the layabouts. Granddad warned Timmy never to go down there. There was things could happen to a boy who wandered too close to the hobo jungle. Men who live too long out of doors get lonely for strange things, Granddad said. It ain't right nor safe for a boy to stray too close to the hobo jungle. That's where the tumblebug man would hide. That's where he'd go. And that's where Timmy had to go too. But first he had to deal with the gatepost. He carried the bucksaw upstairs, out the door and down the stone walkway his granddad painted. Each one of those stones glowed a soft warm green like there was magic in each of them. The gatepost never looked so large, standing there like a long white worm. There wasn't a trace of the paint Timmy had covered it in. Every drop of it was soaked clear up. He knelt at the gatepost. The writing on it was moving, twisting like it wanted to bite him again. He dug the saw into the wood and the gatepost pulled away. Timmy leaned into it, digging the teeth into the gatepost, back and forth, until the saw was singing sweet and clear through the wood. The gatepost throbbed like it was hurting. It bound the saw, the fibers of the wood gritting down like they were trying to eat the blade. The hooks and the curls of the writing leached out, catching at Timmy's hands and arms, stinging and burning where it touched them. Then he noticed how the lilac trees had leaned out and were kind of catching at the gatepost, like they were holding it still for him to cut. Timmy started to yell. The wood was eating him, sucking him in, pulling him under. There were tumblebugs all around it, big as rats. He kept yelling, focusing all of his hate and his love behind that yell, making that yell a motor to move that saw lightning fast, deeper, 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 until the gatepost clunked to the ground. It lay there like a fallen beast. Timmy was afraid to touch it. He wrapped his coat around the post, picking it up like it might explode. Then he ran for the woods. He ran for the woods down to the hobo jungle, down to the railroad tracks. He found the tumblebug man sitting by the fire. His skin hung all loose like he was relaxing. He had a big, hungry mouth with flabby lyre lips, and he was sitting in front of a large, rusty oil barrel. There was a fire blazing in that barrel, and in the shadows, Timmy could see all the other hobos are sitting a little ways away from the fire, like they're afraid of getting too close. You found me, didn't you? Timmy just stood there, afraid to move. Come on in to the fire, the tumblebug man said. It'll keep you warm. Timmy didn't budge. He was as close as he wanted to get. Close enough to see what was burning in that oil barrel. Not wood, but bones. Looked like human bones. I burned your mom and dad, Timmy. Your granddad, too. His voice was something that sounded like a snake crawling through dead, wet leaves. I'm burning your Granny Jill. And when I'm done with her, I'll come for you. I got riding all ready to carve on that big old lilac bush you hide in. The railroad tracks were flexing and breathing like they were trying to rip themselves from out of the dirt. And sometimes they looked like a fence, and sometimes they looked like a cage. And the tumblebugs were as big as dogs, and were chittling and rattling and dancing about like their feet were on fire. And then the tumblebug man lunged at Timmy, screaming across the dirt like there was a rope attached to him, his big mouth and nose wide open, and it looked like he was sucking up the earth, and the sound that came from his mouth sounded a lot like Timmy screaming. Only just before he got too close, Timmy yanked a gatepost from under his coat and heaved it up into the fire barrel. The barrel started simmering and cooking and heaving, and then all at once it exploded like a dozen cannons shooting themselves. And the night wind was alive with 1,000 unpronounceable words, screaming and crawling across the sky like a feast of burning tumblebugs. That's where they found Timmy the next morning. The sheriff and a dozen townfolk found him lying in the heart of the hobo jungle. 6 dead men and more roasted tumblebugs than they could count. There's a lot that believe Timmy was abused by a wandering hobo, and there's some that believe he crawled there alone. But most don't know what to believe. And in time, the whole town did its best to bury the secret with the bodies of those half-dozen hobos who'd been caught in the blast. Granny Jill had recovered completely, although her hair never again achieved its old sheen, graying out like dust on a broken blackboard. She was worried sick, but when she saw what Timmy had done to her gatepost, she whipped him with his granddad's belt. But it was more like she was trying to whip something out of herself. The belt buckle left a kind of scar that kind of looked like the mark the tumblebug man left on the gatepost. Timmy carried that mark until he became an old man, and the years crept on, and at nights he could hear the scar talking, like it was getting set to crawl.
I found this note nailed onto a tree on my front lawn. I don't really know how to describe it. I'll just let you read it for yourself. Note start. I saw you today. It was your birthday. You didn't see me. You hardly ever do these days. Your skin looked so nice and healthy, and your eyes, they were the most beautiful I'd ever seen. You've grown so much. I remember how different you used to look when you were younger. I remember the day I first met you. It was 4 years ago. I was sitting at my desk, head down, listening to the teacher rattling off names for attendance. The teacher called out a name I didn't recognize, and a stranger's voice answered behind me. Was there a new student? The teacher didn't pause for a second, just continued calling out name after name. I turned my head to where the voice had come from. I saw you, a pale thing, so thin, your eyes so red, at a seat that should have been empty. I saw the fireflies flying around you, flickering, dozens of them, never straying far from you. I saw them going through you and coming out through your skin, like you were a mist to them. Can you believe I thought you were a ghost? No one else seemed to acknowledge the new stranger sitting at the back of the class. Class after class, hour after hour passed as I waited for something to happen, for someone to notice you, for you to leave, For you to let out a ghoulish scream and claw at me like in the horror story I was certain I was in. But nothing happened. Teachers came and went. My classmates laughed and slept, and you just sat there. The bell rang for recess. The other kids ran to their mundanities for the day, leaving me and you together in the empty classroom. You stood up and pulled a chair from the desk next to you, making it face your desk. You turned your head to me and spoke. "Well, you're slow today. Come on, ask me your questions." I don't know why I didn't run away screaming at that point. Probably would have turned out better for me in the long run, but let's not speculate. I guess at that point in my life I was pretty bloody lonely. I figured there was only a 50-50 chance you'd eat me, and the other 50 was that someone wanted to talk with me. Kid priorities don't make sense to me either these days. So I went along with the flow. I walked over to your desk, sat down on the chair you pulled for me, and asked my question. What were you? Told me you didn't know. You said that once you were a child just like me, with parents and friends. You used to go to the same schools as me. Then one day, one ordinary day, when you were 10, you just woke up and you were like this, covered in fireflies, and no one could remember you the moment they concentrated on anything else. No one, not even your parents. You told me of how I'd notice you every day, how I'd think of you until recess every day, how I'd come to you every day, how we would talk every day, how we would meet for the first time every day for the last 3 years, and how I'd forget the instant I walked out of the room. How everyone would forget you, how the fireflies would make them. How, for the last 3 years, you'd been alone. Your story was very hard to believe, so I didn't. I asked what reality prank show was I on. You looked, well, unimpressed, and asked me to continue telling my story. I was caught off guard by the non sequitur. You said last time I was here, I was telling you a story, a horror story about a haunted house. As you detailed the story, goosebumps prickled my skin. It was a story I'd been making up in my head, a story I hadn't told anyone yet. At that moment, a million reactions were open to me, all simultaneously adequate and inadequate. But the only thing that seemed proper was to finish the story for you. So I did. Halfway through, you interrupted me to ask if my mother had recovered from her sickness yet. I had to shake my head, a bit ashamed at the fact that I shared this private matter to a stranger. The story ended a few minutes before recess. My next class was in another room. You told me to go. Your steadiness took me back. You seemed so accepting of your fate. Like you'd already gotten used to the idea of being forgotten forever. I was a kid back then. I wasn't a particularly smart kid, and I was probably on the onset of a crush, so you can excuse what I did next as an example of my childhood stupidity. I grabbed my scissors, pressed it against my arm's skin, and dug in. As it drew blood, I pushed it forwards till the cut formed the shape I wanted. Letter by letter, I carved your name onto my arm. Just so you know, I don't regret it. Don't get me wrong, Kid Power might have made me do it, but it sure as hell didn't make the pain go away. It was one of the most painful experiences of my life. But then, even as a kid, I thought what was happening to you was unfair. I remember how your eyes looked when you saw that, the confusion. How strange it was for you that anyone would want to remember. I remember that look so clearly. When I woke up the next day and saw your name on my arm, I remembered you, I didn't forget. That day, for the first time, we had a conversation that wasn't so one-sided. You said no one had ever done anything like that before and suggested I might have a mental illness. I won't deny it, that drew a little blood. As we talked, a creeping thought came into my head. Did you prefer it when I didn't remember? That night, I was sitting up on my bed, staring at your name on my arm, wondering if I should cover it up so I couldn't see it and give you back your privacy, when I heard a crash. I looked up to see my bedroom window shattered and a dirty rock on my floor. I looked out the cracked window to see a dark figure on my lawn. You were outside yelling about how we should hang out. It took me a while to get used to how bad you were at talking to people. Years without practice made you quite a bit rusty. And that was all right. We had a lot of time. For the next 2 years, we spent most of your free time together. Most of the time we talked, you'd tell me an aspect of your life and how you lived. You still stayed in your old house. Your parents never noticed the food that had gone missing, never noticed the extra room or that you'd stolen the extra keys. One night, I confided in you that I was beginning to think you were part of my imagination, Fight Club style. After all, what could you do to me that I couldn't do to myself? You spent the next month or so trying to leave bite marks on my ear or neck to prove a point. Still have a few scars on my ears, so I guess you did. Looking back, I could see the warning signs even then. Your skin seemed to get worse and worse, paler and paler, and you rubbed your eyes raw. It was in winter when we had our wake-up call. The morning began like any other. I woke up, brushed my teeth, and started searching for clothes to wear. It was a winter morning, and my room was dark, so I didn't see your name on my arm. The cold sent shivers through my body, and I pulled out a long-sleeved jacket. A small bell rang in my head. Don't you usually roll up your sleeves? Yeah, and why did I? That was annoying. I finished tidying up and headed to school. On the school bus, I felt oddly content, like something I'd been worrying about had just disappeared. I walked up to the school stairs, down the hall, through my classroom door, and sat down at my desk. The same feeling of a burden forgotten hounded my mind. What was I forgetting? When recess came, I just sat at my desk while my classmates ran out. It felt like a ritual, but I didn't know what for. I was contemplating just walking out to join them when I heard it. There was something small in the wind, like a whisper, but it came over and over, incessant. It sounded like my name. I knew this was strange, that this was worth my attention, but I felt oddly calm. Everything would be all right. Everything would be fine. Just ignore it. I sat there at my desk, my mind a war zone between two conflicting, contradictory voices, when I felt a force tugging on my sleeve. The moment I noticed this, my jacket sleeve tore open. I saw your name in my arm, and then your hand that had ripped my jacket open. You'd been yelling at me for over 20 minutes. I think that was the moment we realized how on edge our friendship really was. One accident away from complete erasure. We spent most of the next year in the town library together, trying to find out what the fireflies were. It wasn't really a problem for me. Because of my mother's treatment, my family couldn't afford to go away on trips, and our house didn't have heating anymore, so I was happy to spend my time with you. Trying to find information was a puzzle in and of itself. After all, how would I read about people I couldn't remember, and how would you find out who was special, when no one could even remember enough about them to record them? We found our old family trees and records. Individually, we'd write down the name of everyone in the book on 2 lists, and then we would compare. The names I hadn't remembered to write down, but you had, would become the focus. They were the names who were under the curse of the Fireflies. We compiled a list of suspicious books we thought could help us, because they were written by or were about the people we were searching for. I read the books with the list of names side by side, reading it again for every page of the book. You scoured the internet on the library computers, on the lookout for articles about the people. Our search would lead us to the first glimpse we got of what was really happening to you. It was late at night when you found the picture. I was a bit drowsy at the time and almost about to nod off when I heard a sharp intake of breath. I turned to see you standing up, pointing at the screen. I didn't see anything. Well, anything noteworthy. On the screen was a picture of a clearing somewhere in the woods. You held up your piece of paper where you'd marked out 2 names. Susie Appleby Reagan, 13. Terry Appleby Reagan, 12. Siblings. For a moment I saw the paper and the screen side by side. Side by side. And then I saw them. 2 figures emerging from the woods toward the camera. They were almost humanoid, with the exception of their limbs, which stretched to nightmarish proportions. Their blank, white skin was that of a pure albino, and looked more like tree bark than anything you expected to find on a mammal. A cloud of fireflies surrounded the duo. The shorter one looked emaciated. I could see their rib cages around which their eyes. God, their eyes. So small, so red. And the taller one, with its white hair, didn't look alive anymore. They were little more than skin wrapped around the skeleton. Fireflies swarmed out of the pair's empty eye sockets. Both reached for the cameraman. I looked at the article surrounding the picture. It was a blog posted by a hiker, 20 years after the last mention of the 2 kids. The picture was a mystery to the cameraman as well. He'd been wanting to go to the woods pictured for a while now, but he never actually remembered going there. The picture had just appeared on his camera one day, out of the blue. We worked through our reading list at a much faster pace, starting at that moment. Maybe we should have gone slower. At least every book, every website we'd left untouched, promised hope. The books that we'd finished and tossed aside promised nothing but the clearing in the woods as one's future. We tossed aside a lot of books. I believe I tore through 3/4 of my reading list before I stumbled across the journal. Oh, God. That horrible, horrible journal. The journal used to belong to a mental patient named Joey, who claimed to be a serial killer. He was locked up in an asylum when the police discovered his supposed victims never existed. He was diagnosed with a need for attention and shoved away. They should have electrocuted him. They should have fried him until his flesh melted and his hair burned. In the journal, he talked about how he carried out his killings. He knew things, bizarre and disturbing things no one else knew. He knew of strange creatures that lived in the woods. Of them, his favorites were the fireflies. I'm not going to tell you how he summoned those things. I trust you. I trust you more than anyone. But a thing like this belongs to the ground more than it will ever to the human mind. In the end, it's sufficient to know that these things were not fireflies. Joey would start his ritual by taking a kid, anyone he pleased. He could take them at any time, in the dead of night from their own homes, or in broad daylight from their front yards. It didn't matter if he was seen. He'd take them to his house and drag them inside. Usually an Amber Alert came up at that point. He didn't care. Like I said, it wouldn't matter soon. He'd drag them to a special room in his house. Here the fireflies would come and latch onto them. Now, nobody was searching for the kids. Not the police, not the parents, nobody. From then on, he could do whatever he wanted to the kid. He'd get bored with him after a day or two, after the child had broken. At that point, he disposed of them. Hacksaw, kitchen knife, anything would work. He detailed a large pit of bodies he kept in the woods, swarming with bugs. One day, I guess he got bored of that, too. So he went right to the police station and turned himself in. Not on account of guilt. No. He just wanted someone to know about the stuff he was doing. Sick bastard. Oh, don't get the wrong idea. He never stopped killing kids. The asylum doors didn't stop him from doing what he liked. It just made him improvise. He made a new way. He modified the flies so they could survive without a host, just in a dormant state. When a child, he specified the age, would approach the swarm, it would latch on and begin its effects. Over the years, the child would warp horribly into the things we saw in the woods. I wish I could hate him in peace. I wish I could say the world owed him nothing, but that wouldn't be true. He detailed a way out. On the final page, there was an exact explanation on how to get rid of the fireflies. You must have seen something in my face, because at that moment, you asked if I had found anything. I said no and closed the book. A few minutes later, you shut down the computer. You picked up the last book and went through it yourself. When you reached the end cover, you tossed it aside. I asked, "What should we do now?" You said it was all right. I could go home. We'd talk about it in the morning. I stood up and walked past the shelves of books. I headed for the library entrance, but stopped right outside the door and waited. I waited until I heard the sniffling sounds. I sneaked back to your table, where you were sobbing quietly. You had your head in your hands. I sat back down as you raised your eyes to me. You said you wished you'd never met me. How happy you were when you had nothing to lose. How I ruined your life. You'd never really gotten better at talking to people. That was the worst love confession I'd ever heard. I remember how we kissed that night. I remember your hands gripping my hair. I remember that kiss. I wish it could have been just a kiss. I'm sorry I ruined that moment. When my arms were around you, I was close enough to steal a firefly without you noticing. I remember holding the firefly in my hand. I remember how it struggled, until it didn't, until it was a part of me. The fireflies shifted. They came over to me and left you. I remember the familiar look in your eyes, the confusion. I never wanted to see that confusion in your eyes again. You deserve to be loved, and you deserve to know that. I wasn't really living anyway. You reached for me. I pulled away as the last lights of recognition faded from your eyes. And then you were just staring at a stranger, walking away into a crowd of strangers. That was a year ago. You've gotten so much better since then. You have so many friends now. So many people at your birthday party. You also look so much healthier. I haven't been as fortunate. My skin's gotten a lot paler, and my eyes hurt all the time now. I couldn't go to school like you did all those years. I haven't wasted my time, though. I found Joey's pit. The bodies. Oh, there were so many bodies. There's a grave for those children now. Without me, my mom could afford her surgery. She looked so happy. Just yesterday, I saw her playing with my baby brother. I saw you crying yesterday. You were with your friends, laughing. For a brief moment, your eyes met mine, and then they were so wet. I think I'm going away. For good, I think. You're not going to be happy if I stick around. I'm so happy I met you, even if you don't remember me. Note end. Sometimes I go through depressive episodes. I feel so lonely, even with my friends. I don't know what's going through my head during these times. Sometimes I end up in a bathtub, a knife in my hands, and my wrists bleeding. Until now, I thought I was cutting my wrists. I wasn't. The cuts, the letters. They've been carving a name to my arm.
On March the 3rd, 1984, Detective Yalmerson of the Houghton Police Department acquired a stack of papers, freshly typed, from a deserted hotel room on the second floor of the Best Western overlooking the canal. The 32-year-old man, James H. Kowalczyk, had rented the room the preceding 3 nights. According to staff, Kowalczyk did not leave his room after arrival, at least not to their knowledge, until sometime after 11 p.m. on the night of March the 2nd. He was a quiet guest. Occasionally, they heard him talking to someone, presumably on the telephone. Management alerted the police when a housekeeper found his abandoned belongings. In addition to the papers, he had left behind his suitcase, wallet, car keys, typewriter, coat, an audio cassette player, and 5 cassettes. To date, no one has found any sign of what happened to Kowalczyk. He led a solitary life, unremarkable in any way, except for the manuscript he left behind. I obtained the original papers in early 1998 through an anonymous source. Witness: James H. Kowalczyk, to whom it concerns. No instrument can match the seduction of the human voice. The rhythms, the cadences, the pitches, the sliding and trembling vowels followed by a click or a little patter of the tongue on the roof of the mouth. Words are incidental, afterthoughts. Nothing can haunt you or fool you like the intonations of a voice. I shouldn't have played the cassettes. To think how long those frozen syllables lingered around the spools, wound up in fury and desperation. How did they not wear thin? The voices of Lottie and the lady became clearer every time I listened. It was like the tape got stronger the more it spun. I could have gotten a job somewhere far away, maybe San Francisco. Could have ditched the Midwest. I was not untalented. I could have made a life. But these 2 towns, Houghton and Hancock, crawling up the steep hills on either side of the canal, would not relinquish their grip. The weathered brick smelter and its narrow smokestacks loomed along the horizons of my daydreams. Voices from the deep woods, dirt logging roads, and dripping mines of the Keweenaw Peninsula had called, reaching me through the cassettes, and I could not tune them out. Well, no help to think that way. From this window, where I watched the snow whirl down into the black canal, I shudder with the red lights blinking in alternation from the opposing towers of the lift bridge. 2 mute watchers, flashing dull signals. Then I glimpse my haggard reflection, half realized in the window, a pale face from another dimension, full of regret for what could have been. But I have to keep going until I find her. I chose this path. I lived here for a couple of years. Well, in Hancock, on the other side of the canal, the gateway to the Keweenaw Peninsula. In all the United States, Hancock houses the largest proportion of Finnish Americans, with their long names full of vowels and double consonants, almost always ending in nen or la. Some still call the place Kuparisari, meaning Copper Island, a land of dense woods, rocky outcroppings, desolate beaches, harsh winters, sparse inhabitants, and old brick foundations besieged by moss and ivy. The Keweenaw Peninsula pokes into frigid Lake Superior like a displaced mass of human memory. Once you cross the lift bridge from Houghton to Hancock, you've entered an island adrift on the sea of time, tenuously tied to a neglected corner of the American mainland. It was 1977. Until then, I'd spent my entire life in Illinois, born and raised in Fox Lake, completing my undergraduate and master's at DePaul. I was studying comparative religions at Suomi College while working part-time as a clerk at a law firm. They always gave me the shittiest work. I was a PhD candidate, for Christ's sake, and they had me collating documents. I couldn't figure out the settings on the new copier. "Peter's done. Someone needs to clean out his office," Mr. Magnuson snapped beside the paper cutter where I stood clutching a handful of oversized paper clips. Peter Lottie has been there for 30 years. He had sued every auto insurer in the Keweenaw. He'd won quite a few cases, some real big ones, representing employees and retirees of the Quincy Mine, the Red Jacket Mine, the Franklin Mine, the Cliff Mine. All of them now closed. The firm used to joke that he had shut them all down, that they went broke paying out his clients, they said. It should come as no surprise that he made plenty of enemies, and tons of admirers too. But he'd cracked. In 1970, something had crawled up between his ribcage and cut out the bottom of his heart. His decline was steady, as if an anchor had tied to his collarbone, pulling his narrow chest and bony shoulders down toward hell. His eyes burned holes into the carpet, then flitted up past your head as he spoke, as if afraid his words would make a ceiling tile drop. I only saw his final 2.5 years. A sinking ghost, the weight hung heavy, his neck strained to keep his eyes off the floor. At first, I thought he avoided eye contact out of arrogance, as if I were too lowly to acknowledge. After a couple of months, I started to suspect something else. He knew he was a shadow. He knew how awful he was to behold, and he was afraid of infecting anyone else with his wraith-like wasting. After those first couple of months, I hardly saw him again. He would disappear into his office behind the frosted glass panel of his closed door. A soft light would glow into the night. I would hear little clicks and muted voices. He'd still be there when I left at 5 p.m. The next morning, it would look like he hadn't slept at all. In fact, at least 3 times he wore the same clothing as the night before. But he wasn't working any cases, not that any of us knew of. Magnuson and the others put up with him because of his legacy. They handed him documents to review, even though they'd already reviewed them. At times, they already had filed a brief before giving it to him. He didn't notice, and he offered no comments. They kept paying his senior partner's share, even though he'd contributed nothing. It was just too sad for everyone. His last big case, the wrongful death lawsuit against the Quincy Mining Company, had fizzled out to nothing. His client, thoroughly discredited before trial, fled to Canada. He said there aren't many files that need to be preserved, Mr. Magnuson said, peering over his bifocals, sitting in a leather swivel chair. There may be a few for storage. Check the dates. But most, if not all, can be shredded. I had seen the interior of Lottie's office a handful of times over the past year. Partial glimpses as the hunched man shambled in and out. A high-ceilinged room with shelves of legal tomes sagging along the walls, black and pale green filing cabinets, tall antique armchairs. I dreaded the prospect of sifting through this musty mess he'd left behind. He particularly mentioned materials from the Kukula case. Magnuson droned. Interview cassettes. Destroy them. My job description did not include cleaning, but I had learned not to ask questions of Mr. Magnuson, so I accepted my assignment without inquiry or complaint. When he handed me a thick bronze key, his eyes dropped back to the brief in his hands. He swiveled away from me. I left. It felt like walking into a sacred and forsaken past. The wood-paneled room was a compartment of Lottie's mind, preserved against the vicious gravity that had assaulted his body. Newspaper clippings from 7 years ago and older sat beneath paperweights. Why wasn't Lottie cleaning out the office himself? Wouldn't he know the documents better than anyone? These were questions I should have asked Mr. Magnuson, but I didn't. The quiet office seemed like a convenient escape. I thought I could turn it into a 2-day project at least. Sifting through the large filing cabinets was tedious, but did not take as long as I'd expected. By 4:15, I was nearly done, having neatly arranged and labeled a stack of banker's boxes by the door. That's when I turned to the narrow green cabinet nestled against Lottie's desk. I had to rummage around in his roll-out drawer to find the key, buried among 1,000 unused pencils. The top drawer of the cabinet was empty. The bottom drawer was where I found them. Those damned, drowned voices that have never stopped spinning through the background of my uneventful life. A precise hand had written Kukula v. Quincy Smelter in black marker on each of the cassette cases. There were 5 subtitles: Interview of Catherine Kukula, Interview of Benjamin Faircrown, Interview of Foreman Sapanin, Interview of Catherine Kukula Part 2, and Interview of blank. Someone had scribbled out the name of the last interviewee. Had I known what I know now, I would have built a bonfire that night and watched until every inch of tape had melted. Of course, even had I tried, I'll bet the voices would have slipped out through the flames, curling up inside the smoke, twisting green fumes into my nostrils, infiltrating my mind. You cannot kill voices like those. In any case, it's too late to reflect. The snow keeps folding into the black canal's surface like minuscule white feathers dissolving into a highway of obsidian. Soon, I will walk the lift bridge to what awaits me on the other side. I cannot stop now what I have returned. Most of the partners had left the office. I pushed the first cassette into the player, shoved the panel shut, and clicked the button. Sitting in Lottie's red, high-backed armchair, I listened with the volume low. After some static, I heard voices. For the sake of brevity, I will omit the tedious, lawyerly questions and leave only what is necessary for context. I must note that Lottie's voice sounded different from when I had heard him in real life. There was a crispness, a lilt, as if every time he spoke he expected his words to lead to an answer, or at least a course of action. In short, he sounded confident that a truth obtainable by language existed. I listened close. Interview of Catherine Kukula, March the 17th, 1970, 8:00 a.m. The sound of shuffling paper. Do you, Mrs. Kukula, agree to this interview being recorded for my own investigative purposes? I do. I do not betray the confidences of my clients. Anything you say will not be shared unless you agree. Thank you. Sound of shuffling paper. How long were you and your husband married? A year. Well, it would have been a year on the 15th of this month. I'm sorry. And have you two always lived in Hancock? No, not always. I was born in Copper Harbor. Tom was from Amik. We met in Houghton a year and a half ago. Then, we moved across the canal into Hancock, right onto Quincy Street, when Tom got his promotion. Promotion at the Quincy smelter, correct? Correct. And is it still your belief that the operations of the Quincy smelter are responsible for the death of your husband? I have no doubt. And how did you come to this belief? Because one of them confessed to me. What? Why didn't you share this before? Because I didn't want to trouble you. Trouble me? We could easily get such an admission into trial, depending on the nature of what was said. Did they put it in writing? No. One of them met with me. When? A week ago. A week after Tom died. How did this meeting come about? I went to Tom's office. A pause. It seems the tape skips several seconds, but misses no dialogue. Go on. I found myself walking through the corridors of the office building. Tom had left his key at home. I was looking for his coat. I thought maybe he had left it in his office. I wandered to a strange wooden door at the back of a long hallway. I know that I shouldn't have opened it, but I couldn't help it. I needed to find Tom's coat. I was worried he was cold. Even though he was dead, I worried he was shivering. She stops speaking for a moment. Glass clinks. Around a conference room table, I saw them, lit by a circle of dim, fluorescent table lamps discussing blueprints projected on the wall. One of them turned to look at me. The others didn't seem to notice. Who was there? The board of directors. Of the Quincy Mining Company? I mean, the real board of directors. Go on. The one who turned to me. He was old. He was hunched. No one could have been that old. He told me I couldn't be there. He would meet me at the lift bridge. So I walked there, to the middle of the bridge, to meet him. I don't remember stopping at home, but I must have, because then I had my scarf with me. It was cold. The canal was frozen. To meet whom? J.T. Blackdoon, Sr. Sound of shuffling paper. I haven't heard of him. I told you, he's one of the directors. The real directors. What do you mean? Her servants, Mr. Lottie. Whose? The Lady of the Hollows. A pounding on the office door made me jump. I clicked pause, pretending to be absorbed with wiping down the narrow green cabinet. I looked up at Mr. Magnuson standing in the doorway. I don't know why I knocked, he muttered. Habits. Funny things, aren't they? Beneath his thick, arched eyebrows, a pair of eyes judged me. You don't have to finish that tonight. It's not urgent. Oh, that's okay. I'd rather get it all done at once, I said without thinking. I should be able to wrap up in the next couple of hours. Mr. Magnuson squinted as he placed his driving glasses on. Then you'll be the last one out. Make sure you lock up. Okay. I waited for the sound of his car rolling down the hill before resuming the tape. My hands were shaking. Once I had settled down, I gazed at a faded newspaper clipping tacked to a cork pencil holder on the desk. The headline read, "Mechanical Engineer Dies in Accident at Quincy Smelter." A photograph of Tom Kukula showed a handsome young man with a thick, blonde mustache. I thought of going home, but the voice of Catherine would not leave my head. Never had I heard such mingled calmness and fright. She had to be insane. But if I did not hear the conclusion, I would not be able to sleep. I was haunted by the low tone she had used when she pronounced Lady of the Hollows. I had to hear just how crazy she was in order to comfort myself. So, I clicked the play button.
Who? Excuse me? The Lady of the Hollows. Who is she? I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard that name. You just said it. You said they were her servants. No. I was explaining that Tom knew all of the safety protocols. He was the de facto safety educator at the smelter. There's no way he could have fallen over the handrail. And not wearing any gear? That's not what you were saying, Mrs. Kukula. I know what I was saying. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to trap me? Aren't you supposed to be my attorney?
Burst of static. I have replayed this section of the cassette many times, as I believe a third voice begins to speak, very suddenly cut off. The voice is so faint, however, that no matter how much I magnify the volume, I never have made out whether it truly was someone else in the room, or nothing more than a radio in a car passing outside Lottie's office.
I didn't mean to upset you. Please, go on.
I will spare you by saying that the rest of the interview proceeds without oddity. Catherine makes no more mention of sleepwalking, a secret board of directors, or the Lady of the Hollows. Lottie asks her questions about the accident, and Catherine describes how Tom had been warning the company for months about safety concerns in the smelter. She goes into the specifics with an impressive attention to detail. She was every bit as intelligent as her husband, and evidently appreciated the intricacies of his work. If you listen close, you will notice hints of a wavering trepidation in Lottie's voice. He no longer lilts, his sentences no longer seem confident of finding their endings. Looking back, I think it was his growing hesitation, the audible record of his thoughts succumbing to nothingness that drew me in with a rope around my wrist. His faltering led me onward, against my will, to the edge of the well where intonations reverberate blind and disjointed, to where our words fail. By the time I had finished the tape, through its drawn-out and anticlimactic conclusion, the window of the office was pitch black. The wind whistled through a fissure in the frame. Lottie evidently had given up on caulking the thing. The sagging wooden building they used as an office had all sorts of problems like this. Wind was always sneaking in through the cracks. I don't know why they didn't move. How did Lottie tolerate the infernal whistling? I went to the supply room, found a half-used canister of caulk, and sealed it shut. The room became silent. So silent. So silent, in fact, I realized how alone I was. Even if I walked home to my apartment up the hill, I would be no less alone. This place, the Keweenaw with its peeling tar paper roofs and brick streets, was alien to me. The people with their thick northern accents and dated clothing were alien, and I've never been any good at making friends. So I went back to the cassettes. I could not listen to more of Catherine, and I did not want to hear more about the smelter. So I grabbed the one labeled Benjamin Faircrown, as nothing I'd seen in the newspaper clippings gave me any indication as to who he was. In the silent room, that quieted chamber of Lottie's mind, the static erupted like a volcano. I welcomed the grating disturbance and the voices that floated like ash trails around me.
Interview of Benjamin Faircrown, March the 19th, 1970, 1 o'clock p.m.
A scratching noise and the sound of the tape seemingly rewinding itself.
Interview of Benjamin Faircrown, March the 19th, 1970, 1 o'clock p.m.
Wind blows in the background. Birds chirp.
Mr. Faircrown, I want to ask you about your neighbor, Catherine Kukula. Yeah, of course. Anything to help? How long have you been neighbors? Oh, they moved in now. What was it? A year ago? She and her husband, Tom. Good folk. Did you ever notice any odd behavior? What's odd to you?
The wind blows hard. The first half of what Lottie says is muffled beyond hearing.
Reality. Did she talk to herself? Did she see things that no one else could see? Oh, sure. She talked to herself. Who doesn't now and then? But she had a good head on her shoulders, especially considering all she'd gone through. Like what?
The wind stops. Utter silence.
Don't you know about her first husband?
A branch crashed on the roof. I heard it scrape the shingles as it slid, and I tried not to look out the window, out of an irrational fear that something outside would see me looking and would turn its eyes on me. But it was just a branch.
No, she did not. 7 years ago, almost the day of Tom's death, she lost Paul in a boating accident near Isle Royal. How? He ran a charter, but one night he went out by himself. No one knew why. Never came back. He washed up on the rocks. Did she ever talk to you about it?
Loud squealing sound. A long pause. When Benjamin resumes, his voice sounds different. He speaks low, as if afraid of someone overhearing.
You shouldn't blame her. Blame her. For what? She came from Corellia, a persecuted land. Therefore, persecution is all she's ever known. She was born in Copper Harbor. The Lady of the Hollows was brought by accident from far away. When the fishermen realized what she was, they burned her with marks, then buried her in the cold. They concealed it, tried to make everyone forget. Now, she calls her witnesses. This is no crime, not under the laws of men and women, not under the laws of any god. The witnesses go willingly. Every 7 years, another testament. Her voice must not, cannot drown. Was it Catherine who told you about the lady?
The wind blows hard, and there is a fluttering sound, like garments flying off a clothesline.
I asked you if it was Catherine who told you about the lady. What?
From here repeats the pattern of Lottie's earlier conversation with Catherine. Benjamin Faircrown denies having said anything about a woman from Corellia or a previous husband of Catherine's. He gives credible and detailed descriptions of the Kukula's unremarkable presence in the neighborhood. Finally, Lottie, exasperated, losing the ability or will to ask further questions, shuts off the tape. You can almost see the leaden weight of his fingertip as it smashes the button in defeat. I replayed both of the tapes, wondering if perhaps their words had been misheard or misunderstood. But they both had said those things they later denied. The tapes do not lie. I thought with sadness of Lottie's last 7 years, loitering around this office with no direction, his inner compass demagnetized. If he continued to struggle with these delusional people, dealing with tragedy by way of strange but understandable dissociations, I could sympathize. I saw the beginnings of his ghost-like transformation. At least, this is what I thought at the time, before I had listened to the remaining cassettes.
Interview of Ed Sepanen, March the 18th, 1970, 9:00 a.m. Foreman, Quincy Smelter. Hold on now. Do you have to record all of this? It's for my own investigation. I double-check for consistency. If I were to summarize the statements, I'd omit details and reword things according to my own inclinations. It would become my own narrative. That's no help to anyone. You didn't record her, did you? Who?
A chair screeches against the floor.
Stop recording. Stop! All right, just settle down. Give me a second.
The tape clicks. It clicks again. Static. Another click. More static. Finally, Sepanen resumes. He seems to be chanting in a rhythmic language. Then, abruptly stops.
He stood on top of the guardrail and threw himself in, just like I said in the report. He stretched his arms out wide, and then into the flames. That reminded me of what my uncle had said about all these accidents over the years. Testament by water. Testament by fire. None find anything but whispers. Wherever it is they go. Who said that? Just old men's stories, Mr. Lottie. Nothing more.
The chair scrapes against the floor. Footsteps.
You're leaving? There's nothing more to say, Mr. Lottie.
I skimmed through the files. Ed Sepanen had worked at the smelter for 18 years. Not long after the interview, he moved to Sault Ste. Marie. His personal history was normal. He had 3 kids. He liked to fish for northern pike. I remember that I hesitated a long time before inserting the cassette with the second interview of Catherine. In truth, I was becoming terrified of her. There didn't seem to be a reason. Yes, she may have been going mad, but there was nothing overtly incriminating about anything she had said. Perhaps it was the sound of Lottie's voice whenever he mentioned her. It quavered, ever so slightly. I wondered where Lottie was at that moment. I felt a desire to speak with him. Maybe it was because whenever the tapes clicked off, I felt so profoundly alone. I needed to know that someone else had heard these things. I needed to hear a confirming voice that wasn't on a cassette. It was getting late. I already had missed my routine bedtime, meaning that no matter when I turned in, tomorrow would be a drag. I had come this far, though. I might as well finish what I had started. I inserted the tape. The sound of furniture being rearranged. A long silence.
Why do you need to interview me again? I told you everything the first time. I need you to hear something.
A click. The tape of the first interview plays, but the sleepwalking account of Catherine is not there. It is gone. The interview moves straight to the account of the smelter and Tom's safety concerns. A click. The noises of people shifting position, it seems.
Mr. Lottie, are you okay? It was there. That's impossible. What are you trying to show me? The things you said. The first things. Have you requested the incident reports yet? Yes, they're on my desk. I haven't had a chance to fully review. I see. I don't know that I get what you're trying to find. I'll show you what Benjamin Faircrown said. Who? Your neighbor. The one next door. There's no one next door. We're on a corner lot. The house next to us has been empty for years.
A click. The tape of the interview with Benjamin Faircrown plays uninterrupted. The occasional sound of Lottie or Catherine shifting in their seats. A click.
Well, I don't know how to say this. You need to tell me everything. Say it. What about your first husband? I was never married before, Tom. Then why did your neighbors say you were?
Catherine clears her throat, sounding very uncomfortable.
That was your voice, Mr. Lottie. It was lower, but that was you. What? No, I went to his house. We spoke in his yard. There's no one at that house. Whoever he wasn't my neighbor. If you saw someone there, why did you hire me? Oh, because I heard you're the best. My husband is dead. But now I'm worried that, well, this is all taking a toll on you. You don't look well.
A long silence interspersed with sparks of static.
Thank you, Miss Kakula, for your concern, But I'm fine. And I think, perhaps, it may just be that the reports won't show. There are other avenues a case has to take sometimes. Thank you for your time. I apologize for... I shouldn't have made you come today. We'll talk on Monday, after I've...
Recording ends. I listened again to the interview with Benjamin Faircrown. Could Catherine have been right? The voice of Faircrown did sound remarkably similar to that of Lottie. Had his professional reputation as an attorney fooled me? But there was a difference in quality between the two voices. Marked distinctions in the mannerisms, the intonations. Lottie would have had to have been an incredible actor. And that seemed improbable, given what I knew. And the things Foreman Sepanen had said were strange. But would they have been so strange if I hadn't heard them after hearing the conversation with Faircrown? But no. I had heard Catherine speak of the Lady of the Hollows, too. I replayed it many times to make sure that it was real. Lottie could not have mimicked that voice. Unless he had spent so many years alone with these tapes, There were indeed peculiarities in the recordings. Only one tape remained, the one with the scribbled-out name. Something inside me said I should stop. My inner compass, which I ignored, was pointing me away. I could go home to my empty, quiet apartment. I could sleep. I could listen to or destroy the tapes tomorrow. I sat there for a long while, uneasy in Lottie's tall chair, staring at the green filing cabinet. Thinking I heard a branch snap on the ground outside, I stood up as if to leave, then chided myself for giving in to the paranoia the cassettes had induced. I wouldn't let my mind get the best of me. I would listen. In defiance of my own fear, I sat down, inserted the final cassette, and clicked the play button. Footsteps. A tapping. Something being dragged. Static. A match is struck. Floorboards creak. Static. A door opening slowly with shrill hinges. The door shuts. Static. The sound of chair legs scratching the floor. When Lottie speaks, he sounds calm but grave.
Interview of J.T. Blackdoon Sr., March the 22nd, 1970, 12:30 a.m. Mr. Blackdoon, do you mind me recording this interview?
Then, there arises a voice that sounds much like Lottie's, only slower, deeper, and coarse as gravel. It sounds like Lottie imitating a very old man.
I do not object. Do you serve the Lady of the Hollows? Why don't you ask her yourself? Is Catherine the Lady of the Hollows? Did she kill her husband? You do not need to consult me to answer those questions. What is it you really want to ask? It doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. Why doesn't anyone remember what they say? What has she done to them? Most everyone tries to forget, but a few, they try to remember. They want others to hear. Those upon whom...
Static.
I only want to know what she's after. No, I don't even need... I only need to know how to stop it. What stops all of this? What should I do? Testify. You know I can't do that. Testify. No, I'd be ruined. You must choose. She is already there, in the hollows of your mind. What will you say? What will you not say? No, it's not all in my head. I'm not crazy. You are not crazy. Why is she doing this to me? She commands no one. She makes you do nothing. You go willingly.
Static explodes. The tape seems to rewind and fast forward in alternation. A flood of incomprehensible whispers.
No, I won't go. I won't go.
The sound of his muttering was difficult to take, but not nearly as difficult as the silence that followed. For the recording continued for 7.5 minutes, though neither voice said another word. There may be a soft sobbing, or laughter, or both. The first interview of Catherine replays, a recording of a recording, in static. Always the static. Then the creaking of floorboards. Then the door closing. The footsteps and taps receding. Click. The tape stops. I sat in the chair, afraid to move, wary of shifting the silent air. It was like the moment when, as a child, you prepare to jump onto your bed, avoiding whatever hands may be waiting to grab you from beneath the box spring. You do it fast and you don't look. You tuck yourselves into your covers. You know it's silly, but sometimes you do it even when you're older. I shoved the cassettes into the file cabinet, locked it, grabbed my coat, shut off the lamp, and fled. I strode up the hill to my apartment, not daring to look down any alley nor into any window. I especially did not look in the direction of the smelter, empty and abandoned by the canal. The next morning, it was no surprise to hear the talk in the office. Peter Lottie had leapt from the top of Lift Bridge. How he got up there, no one could explain. The others seemed sad and ashamed as they gathered around the steaming coffee pot. I felt desperate. I felt myself burdened by the knowledge of all things. Knowing the beginning, I knew the ending. Or rather, I saw there was no beginning, and therefore, no ending. Fictions. There is no controlling things. That evening, after everyone else had left, I gathered the cassettes and stowed them away in my apartment. I began making plans to move. I never finished my doctorate. 3 months later, I fled downstate to the Lower Peninsula. I thought about tossing the cassettes out my window as I drove beside the long, sagging cables of the Mackinac Bridge. I could have thrown them to the waves, to sink, to drown, to be quieted forever. But there is no real escape from a voice once you've heard it. Half a page of blank space separates the final paragraphs of the manuscript, which seem to have been typed at a later time. I hear them through the walls. When the sliding doors open, the croaking commandments slip in with the wind drifting through the lobby. There are no young voices here, but from across the canal, from over the crests of Quincy Hill and Mount Ripley, from some undisturbed glen, secreted away in shadow from the grinding machinations of time. She sings a muttering song, and my heart screws tight because there by the canal, out my hotel window, I see her. Finally. After all these years. A hazy outline in the falling snow. A white blur erases her feet, making her wavy body seem to float. Frost coats her bare arms, and yet she does not shiver. A thin, glittering arm reaches out to beckon me with an open hand. I want to see her eyes, but they are lost in shadow. Is that what I will look like? Will my lips turn blue and shadows surround my eyes? I remember what Benjamin Faircrown said. You cannot blame her. Look at the jagged icicles dangling from her young, white hair. I feel she's not only a tormentor, but a victim. She, like myself, is woven into a circle of persecution she did not choose. No beginning, no ending. You can't recite it away. Lottie's stammering hesitation haunts me. For the last 7 years, I have felt my own voice fading away. I do not want it to disappear forever. It is better to merge than die. I leave this so all may know. When she called, I went willingly. I felt I owed it to her. After all, I'd done no more than Lottie to find out the truth. He left the cassettes. I leave these papers. And now, you have read these things. Understand the spools will not stop spinning until they have entwined your own voice into the relentless loops. You will follow the path of Lottie and myself, and who knows how many others into the forgiving cold or annihilating heat. Whichever we choose, we, the lesser witnesses. As long as her whispers linger out there in the hills and waters, she will call for you too, until you go to where we all go, to the earthen chasms where our voices mingle and fade. And so, when at last you hear the whistle through your bedroom window turn to a murmur, what testament will you leave? The Lady of the Hollows. Witness James H. Kowalczyk. When Detective Yolmerson listened to the 5 unlabeled cassettes, he found no references to J.T. Blackdoon or the Lady of the Hollows. Nor did he find a single interview of Catherine Kukula. The unusual details reported by Kowalczyk simply did not exist. The only disturbing element was the last cassette, in which Lottie did in fact hold a conversation with himself. He debated the details uncovered by his investigation from 2 opposing points of view, trying to determine whether or not Miss Kukula had been responsible for her husband's death. Far from reflecting an abrupt slide into insanity, the one-person dialogue seemed like the rational process of an intelligent man, trying to reconcile contradictory facts, struggling to determine his ethical duty in the event his client had committed murder due to an underlying mental illness. Having listened to Lottie's unsettling observations about Catherine, Detective Yolmerson reopened the case of Tom Kukula's death at the Quincy smelter 14 years prior, but found himself at an immediate dead end. The smelter had ceased operations over 10 years ago. All reports of the incident were lost. Moreover, no evidence showed that Tom Kukula ever had been married. There was no Catherine Kukula, neither according to private interviews nor to public records. Yolmerson determined the case was nothing but an elaborate hoax, then closed the file. When I tracked down Yolmerson, his former colleagues either could not or would not tell me where he went. He retired on short notice in 1991. In his final years, he had shown signs of rapid mental deterioration, speaking in mumbled half-sentences. I base my report on the few comments he made to colleagues, as well as documents I received pursuant to a Freedom of Information Act request. Perhaps I should note one last thing that was shared with me under condition of anonymity. She was a junior detective at the time of Yolmerson's retirement. In the final months before his departure, whenever the snow was falling, she would find Yolmerson alone in his office, his chair turned away from his desk, staring with glassy eyes at the frozen canal. When the junior detective asked what he was looking at, Yolmerson replied, "A highway of obsidian. A man without a coat walking down it, getting buried, getting forgiven, dissolving." She asked what he was talking about, if he was still working the Kowalczyk case, in response to which he chuckled and replied, "There's nothing to solve. This is no crime. Not under the laws of men and women. Not under the laws of any god." She asked him to say more, but he acted as if he hadn't heard. Author's note. After some digging, I found there was a Paul Johnson who died in 1963, but his body was not found among the rocks of Isle Royal, nor anywhere. In his boat, docked at Copper Harbor, the police found what they described as an incoherent suicide letter. There was no record of him marrying. Author's note. A people, region, and culture split by the modern border of Finland and Russia. Karelia is of special significance to Finnish history and mythology. The national instrument, the kantele, was created there. Rune singers were prominent. The political past is torn and bitter. Kowalczyk's note. I've never found any evidence that a man named Benjamin Faircrown lived in the Keweenaw. Author's note. I too have found no records of Benjamin Faircrown. I did find a Ben Fulcrow, who lived near Lac La Belle from the 1930s and 50s. He was a fisherman. Sometime after returning from war in 1945, he chose to live in self-imposed exile, growing vegetables, refusing to interact with any of his neighbors. People guessed that he had seen something traumatic, probably during his time overseas. He had some kind of falling out with the other fishermen over something that happened on the frozen lake one winter in the late 40s. Kowalczyk's note. I consulted Professor Tapio of Suomi College. She said it was the Karelian dialect and that Ed Sepanin was chanting a tietaja, a kind of rune song. Professor Tapio did not recognize many of the words. This rune song seemed very archaic in her opinion, dating back perhaps as far as the mid-17th century. I lost her handwritten translation years ago when I moved downstate. What stood out to me then, and what I recall now, is that she believed the function of this rune song was protective. It explained origins of valleys. By reciting it, one called upon the valley's spirit to contain something, and Professor Tapio did not recognize the word, that had been secured between the hills. Author's note. Kowalczyk incorrectly refers to what Sepanin chanted as a tietaja, when the correct term would be a sinti. A sinti is a metric incantatory poem that explains the origin of a phenomenon or entity. Finnish shamans, or more literally, knowers, were referred to as tietajat. A fundamental wisdom of the Teatajat is that in order to control something, whether it be a flood, a storm, a disease, a famine, an animal, or an emotion, one must not only know, but recite its origins. Author's note. Apparently, Lottie detailed a number of incriminating pieces of evidence that Kowalczyk either did not notice or did not care to include in his excerpts. For example, Lottie said that 2 witnesses had observed Tom and Catherine eating dinner at Andriani's in downtown Hancock, not less than an hour before his death. Foreman Sapanin said Tom had complained about, and I quote, his woman, wanting him to run the tests at the smelter that late in the evening, when he, referring to Tom, thought it could wait until morning. Catherine knew details of the moments leading up to his death that only someone within the smelter could have known. Her fingerprints may have been found on a handrail. Author's note. I identified a Katerina, or Catherine, Lasko, who had been born in Copper Harbor at approximately the right time to be the same age as Catherine, but locals assured me she had married and relocated to Green Bay in the 1960s. Interestingly, there was an earlier Katerina Lasko, apparently unrelated, who came as a refugee from Soviet-controlled Eastern Karelia after the Continuation War. She threw herself under the ice of Lac La Belle in 1949, at the age of 21. This case momentarily distracted me from my purpose, for the details surrounding her death were fascinating. She had committed what can only be called a ritualistic suicide, imitating the features of semi-preserved murder victims discovered in European bogs, such as the Tolland Man and the Yidde Girl. She had shaved part of her head and tied ropes around her limbs. In addition, it appeared she had branded her wrists with a distorted version of the Hanun Veokana, the looping Finnish symbol of luck and protection. According to the original account, a group of ice fishermen tried in vain to restrain her before she cast herself into a fishing hole. There was not enough material here to distract me for long. However, despite this wild account, none of the locals seemed able to remember the earlier Katerina having existed at all.
Chilling tales for dark